from Abuja.
Hello, thank you for being a part of our show. I appreciate you. I'm Magnus Paco, and this is Magnus Paco GVA, Global Views Africa. As you know, it's all about how we can raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. In view today, Africa in leadership and organizational challenges. We will hear a brief statement on this from President Barack Obama. We will also hear what Donald Kaberuka of the African Development Bank has to say on the issue. But before that, in our hidden economics, why you should get it over with. Now up next, we bring you some business and development indicators in our quick view. That's coming right up. Corruption is a problem for all countries. The Corruption Perceptions Index ranks countries and territories based on how corrupt their public sector is perceived to be. A country or territory's ranking, which for 2014 goes from 1 for the least corrupt to 175 for the most corrupt, is based on scores that indicate the perceived level of public sector corruption on a scale of 0, highly corrupt, to 100, very clean. A poor ranking is likely a sign of widespread bribery, impunity, and lack of punishment for corruption. In this connection, which of the following countries is not among the top 10 least corrupt countries in the world? Denmark, Sweden, Canada, and the United Kingdom. Which of the following countries is not among the top 10 least corrupt countries in Africa? Botswana, Ghana, South Africa, and Nigeria. Stay with us for our answers coming up shortly. Still in view, leadership and organizational challenges facing Africa. But up next in our hidden economics, why you should get it over with. On the surface, it would seem like given a choice, most people would rather delay a painful event. Really? Well, in reality, that is not what actually happens. Indeed, that's why when a delayed event appears to be actually about to happen, people are relieved and indeed ready to get it over with. On June 11, 1982, the much anticipated boxing match between the great Larry Holmes and Jerry Cooney finally took place. To declare how badly Larry Holmes wanted to get it over with, he came into the ring from the dressing room to the tune of the song by McFadden and Whitehead, "Ain't No Stopping Us Now." The fight was the most hyped black versus white boxing match in about 3 decades. Jerry Cooney, a superb knockout specialist, was thought to be the man, and indeed the best white man, to defeat the great champion that Larry Holmes was. As the song says, there's been so many things that's held us down, but now it looks like things are finally coming around.
There's been so many things that's held us down, but now it looks like things are finally coming around.
And so it also appears with the 2015 Nigeria elections. After the fears of postponement and the actual postponement, things are finally coming around, and ain't nothing stopping us now. We are on the move. Concerning the elections, the wait has been costly in the national and international anxiety and uncertainty. After the election and Nigeria passing the test, things should come back to normal again. And that's why people indeed want to get it over with. The discounted present value of any future pain and losses often turn out to be much lower than the weight and burden of waiting. So let's get it over with. Indeed, as we often see, the waiting often turns out to be more dreadful than the event itself. So luckily for the 2015 elections, Nigeria is set to end the anxiety and the uncertainty and all the costs of waiting and postponing. Nigeria will see that it's far better for the country to get it over with. Thankfully, we are on the move. Our hidden economics for you. Before we start our discussion in view, here are our quick view answers. The country on our list, not among the top 10 least corrupt countries in the world, is the United Kingdom, at number 14 in the world. The country on our list, not among the top 10 least corrupt countries in Africa, is Nigeria, at number 136 in the world. For information on our show, see our contacts displayed on the screen. In view today, leadership and organizational challenges facing Africa. It is clear that Africa needs good leadership to confront many organizational challenges facing the people. Without being properly organized, our institutions and processes will suffer and thus constrain growth in the private sector, where well-paying jobs should be created. Recently, Donald Kaberuka spoke to a group of people on the challenges facing Africa. Mr. Kaberuka is the president of the African Development Bank. Before his current position, he was the Minister of Finance and Planning in Rwanda. In his discussion, Kaberuka highlights many challenges holding Africa and constraining inclusive growth. But before we join Kaberuka's remarks, we have a brief statement from Barack Obama, President of the United States of America, on leadership today in Africa. These remarks were taken from his eulogy at Nelson Mandela's funeral. President Barack Obama.
For around the world today, we still see children suffering from hunger and disease. We still see rundown schools. We still see young people without prospects for the future. Around the world today, men and women are still imprisoned for their political beliefs and are still persecuted for what they look like and how they worship and who they love. That is happening today. And so we too must act on behalf of justice. We too must act on behalf of peace. There are too many people who happily embrace Madiba's legacy of racial reconciliation, but passionately resist even modest reforms that would challenge chronic poverty and growing inequality. There are too many leaders who claim solidarity with Madiba's struggle for freedom, but do not tolerate dissent from their own people. And there are too many of us on the sidelines, comfortable in complacency or cynicism, when our voices must be heard. The questions we face today, how to promote equality and justice, how to uphold freedom and human rights, how to end conflict and sectarian war. These things do not have easy answers.
Thank you for staying with us. We'll now pick up with Donald Kaberuka.
Africa is turning the corner. The growth you see is sustainable. It is making a difference. You get two types of reactions. One of acute skepticism. But we have seen this before. Can it be sustained? It is all about minerals and oil. The growth is not getting down to the people. Now, these are questions we must answer. The second question I get often is this. Yes, economies have been growing, but they've exposed serious weaknesses, especially in the infrastructure. Literally, every African country which has been growing very well has seen difficulties in energy. And you know, it takes some time between planning and getting the first megawatt onto the factory. The third skepticism I've often had is, but look at the rate of urbanization in Africa, 40% of the continent. Many of the people are not skilled, and therefore, even if there is economic growth, they are not participating in the benefits. Now, these again are questions we should answer. Now, we decided with the OECD and the European Commission to focus on the issue of skills because it is critical. If you are a young African in an urban slum, you see skyscrapers, economies growing around you, but you have no skills, and it is too late for you to acquire them, there is a problem. And I think you have seen this in a number of countries. However, in this report, we go a bit further. Many of you recall that in the last 2 decades, throughout the African continent, and even among the donors, the issues of skills, of higher education, of technical training was not given emphasis. There was a view that the social agenda passes by an expanded opportunity to primary education, and you all agree you cannot have education until you have all children to school. And that must continue. But there was a massive neglect of higher education in Africa, especially its scientific and technical component. And therefore, Africans have been going abroad for training, to study science, mathematics, technology, and often they have stayed there. And Africa has been importing huge amounts of temporary technical capacity. And that is one of the explanations of the challenges we're facing. Now, I want to be clear on this. Skills don't emanate simply by higher training. Skills are developed from all sorts of education. But anyone who knows the continent in the 60s, when the continent had some of the leading universities in the world, I know some African universities where Europeans will go to study medicine, to study engineering. Now, all those universities from West Africa, Central Africa, Southern Africa were allowed to run down. And today there are very few universities on the continent which can provide the kind of skills which our continent badly needs. Now, if you compare this with some of the Asian countries, this is exactly the reverse of what happened. And I think time has come to say the agenda of growth, which must be central to the economic development of the continent, must also pass by a skills agenda. Now, at the African Development Bank, we have, of course, always been interested in this issue, but we're now giving it a special impetus. We have decided to set up a dedicated division for higher education, science and technology. I think Mr. Tapsoba is there. He'll be able to engage you later on what we're trying to achieve. But I think time has come for the African continent to educate its children in those skills which matter for the economy of today. Now, if someone has said to me, well, but look at the Indians. They send their kids to the US, to Europe, acquired technical skills, scientific skills, and they have come back. There is another agenda. How do we get the African diaspora abroad to contribute with their skills to the development on the continent? That too must be part of our agenda. We are not by any means saying that all Africans should come back to live in Africa and work on the continent. It is not necessary. And it is not all about remittances. It is about skills flow both ways. And I hope that in the course of the day, you can engage on this issue. Now, going back to the issue of growth. I travel quite a lot on the African continent. And I've heard the issue of, okay, Mr. President, these economies are growing very well, but where are the benefits for the people? Where is the money in the pocket? For me, I've always given three answers. I hope I'm right. But there are economists here who can engage you. The first answer is straightforward. That what matters is not increase in growth, it is increase in per capita incomes. What matters is increase in per capita incomes. Now, to the extent that population is increasing at 3%, it means often the benefits on growth are consumed by increased population. That is a fact. The second reason is that if you look at the global numbers, which we'll be discussing today and tomorrow, the rate of growth looks very good. But if you break down by sectors, you find that the sector which has been growing the least is agriculture. In many of the countries, agriculture has not grown beyond 3%, which means at the same rate as the increase in population. And therefore, for many people who depend on agricultural incomes, who live from that particular sector and its benefits, which has been growing on at 3%, that's where the problem lies. The third reason I've given, I hope the chief economist can confirm this later, is that the rate of urbanization on the continent now perhaps is underestimated by the statistics. We have been saying that the growth is about 10% per annum. In some countries, including my own, is much higher. And so now, roughly 40% of Africans are living in urban areas. But this is urbanization without industrialization. I repeat, this is urbanization without industrialization. It is urbanization because you have got the push and pull factors. But many of those people who are migrating the cities don't have the skills for the opportunities which come about because of growth in other sectors. And this is something we must address. And therefore, at the African Development Bank, working with the French Agency for Development, AFD, we're trying to understand the interaction between these three factors, which will be important for African economies in the coming 2 decades. That is demography, urbanization, and climate change. What we call the big three trends, which will influence where the continent goes in the coming 2 decades. I hope this study comes out soon, but I think it's able to explain why sometimes we see growth and we don't see immediate benefits.
As I said earlier, without our societies being properly organized, our institutions and processes will suffer and thus constrain growth in the private sector, where well-paying jobs should be created. Today in Africa, sadly, the best opportunity for making good money seems to be in the government and not in the private sector. This is anomalous, and it is a primary culprit that must be arrested for inclusive growth to occur. There is no doubt that Africa faces serious leadership challenges in various arenas. Africa needs the leadership to organize our societies and build institutions that will provide the processes for achieving high levels of living for all the people and for effective global competitiveness. Quite often, and indeed lately, many people have come to a false understanding of the statement often credited to President Obama, concerning looking for strong institutions and not strong men. Frankly, folks, you will never have strong institutions in Africa without the emergence of strong men and women. Not strong men in their ability to take advantage of the people and misappropriate their resources, but strong men in their character, integrity, and values, and with a vision to build institutions that can prevent the emergence of strong men that come on for themselves and their cronies only. Note that the following are some strong men and women who set up institutions and processes that have helped to transform their nations and their peoples. George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, John F. Kennedy, Mahatma Gandhi, Winston Churchill, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, Margaret Thatcher, Angela Merkel, Lee Kuan Yew, Olusegun Obasanjo, and Mahathir Mohamad. Of all the resources on earth, the most important is the human resource. It is from our country's human resource stock that we get our leaders. Therefore, to have high-quality future leadership, we must ensure that our children are educated and given the right skills for leading and building a productive society. Understanding, as Donald Kaberuka has said, that organization without industrialization may not mean much. Economic growth in Africa must generate material outcomes that get to the people. A trickle-down growth strategy in Africa will not work. The poverty membrane is too thick for that. What will work is a bottom-up design, as with the Radiant Africa strategy. This is the way to sustainable development in our communities and among our nations. I'm Magnus Paco, and that's my view.
I